Good morning, gentlemen. I'm back to another session, and today I'm going to talk on something very important, and it concerns the Indian soldiers, so they would be very interested. I would request all of them to listen very carefully to what I'm going to say. I'm going to talk about one rank, one pension. That is OROP. This is something which has been hanging fire for almost 4 decades, and there has been an agitation going on led by General Satbir Singh. So I'm going to talk about it. But before I talk about it, I'm going to talk something about how the Indian Army evolved and the culture that it has got. A culture akin to saying yes sir, 3 bags full. Now the Indian Army was earlier the British Indian Army. The Indian Army traces its heritage to the British Indian Army. And what was the British Indian Army? It was a derivative from the armed constabulary, a militia which was set up by the East India Company. This force which the East India Company had set up later on metamorphosed into the Indian Army, and it was codified, and in 1893 the Articles of War were written, which were the rules of the Indian Army, and the present acts of the Indian Army and Air Force and Navy in 1950 are based on the Articles of War of 1893. The Indian Army was actually a linchpin for the propagation and the enforcement of the glory of the British Empire. Now that's a very important point. In other words, it was a mercenary force. The British were the paramount rulers. They looked after the army. I'll say that. They looked after the army and the soldiers very well. But the army responded by giving them their unstinted loyalty, and they used them for operations all over the world. Well, they used them in the 2 wars, in Mesopotamia, in Italy, France, and earlier they used them in the Afghan wars, they used them in the Burma campaign, they used them even in China, in the Opium Wars, and in the Boxer Rebellion at the turn of the 20th century. The Indian Army was the main cog on which the British Empire rested. And this army obeyed every order of the British. Now, there were a handful of British officers in command, that's all, but the majority of the army were Indian soldiers. They were the Baluch, they were the Pathan, the Gurkhas, the Sikhs, the Rajputs, the Dogras. These were what the British had classified as the martial class, and they confined their recruitment to them, and they looked after them, and these fellows were very loyal to the British Army. And how loyal they were, I'll tell you. In 1919, General Dyer led a troop of Indians that consisted of the Baluch, the Rajputs, and the Gurkhas, led by General Dyer, who had declared martial law in Amritsar and had banned meetings. And despite that, a meeting took place in Jallianwala Bagh, and General Dyer led his men and ordered him to fire on the crowd. Now, the one point which I want to make here is that we always keep talking, the British did this thing, the British killed so many in Jallianwala Bagh. I think 379 got killed and another 1200 were wounded, and these figures are open to discussion. But the fact is, there was only one Englishman present in that entire scenario, and that was General Dyer. The rest of the soldiers, the troops, were all Indians. They were the Rajputs, the Gurkhas, and the Baluch. And these men were given an order to fire on an unarmed crowd, and they did it. Now, can anybody deny that? Not one amongst them thought, there's only one damn Englishman, why not shoot him dead? It didn't happen. I'm bringing out this incident to show you that the Indian Army and the officer cadre, which came later, had that ingrained character of not opposing authority. That is the point. That's the point I'm making. And when India became free in 1947, that same thing continued. The same regiments were maintained, the caste-based recruitment continued, there was no change, and the officer cadre, which had been steeped in British thought, they took over and they never opposed the government for anything. I'll give you an example. Just after independence, Pandit Nehru enforced a new pay code in which the pays of the officers and the civil servants was reduced. Now, they made an exception that those who were members of this Indian civil service, that is, who had got their jobs under the king, their salaries were not reduced. But the soldiers, the officers of the Indian Army who had got the king's commission, their salaries were reduced and they accepted it. And the man that time was General Cariappa. No reflection on him because his thinking was like that. Similarly, when General Rajendra Singh took over, the post of CNC was abolished, the commander-in-chief. And it was accepted without a demur. And at every stage in the order of precedence, the Indian Army officers were reduced in status and it was accepted. Now, why I talked about Jallianwala Bagh is that it is something ingrained in the Indian Army not to oppose authority. We get everything as it is. We are happy that you made us a general, you made us a marshal, good. We don't want to do anything further. And even Field Marshal Manekshaw, I have all the respect for him, but he unfortunately did nothing for the army, for the officer cadre. And the only thing which I remember about him is reading a statement that if I had gone to Pakistan in 1947, he had opted for Pakistan when the division of the Indian Army was being done, Pakistan would have won the war. This angered the Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, and he was in the doghouse after that. Then we had General Babur, and during his time, there was something called rationalization of pensions which took place. The Indians, I believe, the officers had 70% of the pay last drawn as pension, the civil servants had 33%, and this was rationalized to all of them as 50%. In other words, the officers and the Indians, soldiers' pension was reduced. It was accepted. Nothing happened. But then the pension stagnated for a long, long time, and it became very hard for the old-timers to continue to exist. In such circumstances, at least I will give credit to one man, and he is General Satbir Singh. He started an agitation to draw the attention of the government to the fact that the ex-servicemen need to be looked after. There were a few others, throwing spokes here. There was a lieutenant general who was talking all crap. And he was saying everything is fine, honky-dory, don't do all this, don't do that. But that's not the point. The point is that the leadership led by Satbir Singh at least tried to beard the lion in his den, That's something very nice. But I'm afraid he didn't achieve anything. Let's accept the fact. He was doing an agitation for years. He started a hunger strike at Jantar Mantar, a relay strike, agitation all over the country, but the government was not convinced. They were not bothered about it. Because the Congress government, which was in power, very well knew that the soldiers are going to accept everything, and unless you see the army chief wants to intervene, nothing is going to happen, and the army is not interested in intervening. Why should he intervene? He's the army chief, he'll become an ambassador, he'll become governor, so nothing came of it. Now that is the actual fact. That is, there was no pressure on the government to sanction one rank, one pension. There were lots of officers who returned their medals. This I thought was very silly. Medals are something which you earned, which you won in war. I went into war, I earned my medals. I won't give them away for anything. And these people went and deposited medals with the military secretary of the president. And what did they achieve? Anything? Nothing came of it in any case. And now they want the medal back and nobody knows where they are, and few of them may not get them back also. They will probably be lost somewhere. So all these developments were taking place. But credit must go to Satbir Singh that he made the problem come alive and the public became aware of it. So much so that Rahul Gandhi, toward the fag end of the Congress regime, did accept one rank, one pension. And a committee was appointed by Parliament called the Bhagat Singh Koshari Committee, which went into the nuts and bolts of OROP and gave a report. They said so many things, and one of them was that the pension would be revised every year. Very fine. But this was only a recommendation. It's not something which was binding. And the finance minister, Mr. Chidambaram, made a token allocation in the budget of 2014 of 500 crores. They got no meaning. But at least the ball had been set rolling. Now Narendra Modi, who came into power in 2014, was a different sort of a man. He probably realized that the soldiers had been given short shrift, and in a momentous rally, I think in Haryana, which was attended by General V.K. Singh, who had left service, he promised that he would sanction one rank, one pension as per the approval of Parliament. Come the election, the BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party, with the leadership of Narendra Modi, won the election. They came back to power. Now a thing which has been hanging fire for 40 years suddenly came alive, and all credit must go to Narendra Modi. There's so many people talking, and that the sanction is not as per the Kochari committee, and pay is not being revised every year, is being revised every year. Maybe they are correct, but the fact is there was a substantial increase in pensions. I can say for experience because my pension got doubled. And I will give credit to Mr. Narendra Modi. The soldiers who were sinking started getting money, and the government made an amendment, of course. In place of 1 year, they made it 5 years revision. Well, something was done, and credit must go to Narendra Modi. Now let's be very clear about it that this one rank, one pension actually has to be seen in the perspective of the economy of the country. India is not a rich country. We have people, almost 50% living below the poverty line. So one should not ask for the moon, we want this, we want that. You must get something which makes you feel respectable. And I think all credit should go to Mr. Narendra Modi, the Indian Prime Minister who did it. I remember Modi went to a tour of the Indian troops in Ladakh, and he said it was his good fortune that he was the man who was going to sanction one rank, one pension. Now, whether you call it OROP, you call it anything, the fact is the pensions under Modi went up substantially, and the Indian soldiers must thank it. And I do not really appreciate the fact that soldiers who are basically Kshatriyas should start some relay strike or hunger strike or something in Jantar Mantar. The important thing at that time was to convince the top brass of the armed forces to pressurize the government, and they didn't do anything. We had a minister in the cabinet, and he was a full 4-star general, V.K. Singh. What did he do? Nothing. All credit should go to Narendra Modi for whatever has been given. My reading is that almost 80% of what was required for the OROP has been given. And I'm talking from personal experience. I've spent a lot of time in the armed forces. My father was a senior officer in the forces. My great uncle fought in the Second World War, and I have an association of 100 years with the Indian Armed Forces. I'm not one of those who just keeps talking and biting here and there. I don't believe in that. The fact is, give the devil his due. Narendra Modi has done more than anything, despite the top brass doing nothing, having a concept of servility only and just staying always 3 bags full. And the general staff can be faulted at so many places they did nothing. Everybody talks that Nehru let down India as far as China is concerned. Yeah, he did. He had no concept. But did any of the top generals put any note up to him? Okay, look, China is going to be an address, let us beef up the border. I am not aware of any note put up by any general, right from Karyapa, Rajendra Singh Ji, and Thapar and all these gentlemen, And the sad part is that General Thapar, he accepted orders from a joint secretary. Now, what can you say for such a man? Do you expect such a man to go and talk of anything about pensions? A man who accepts an order from his joint secretary? It's all part of history. I just relate what actually happened. What happened was, Nehru was going to Sri Lanka for a meeting, and at the airport he made a very bombastic statement. I have asked the army to throw the Chinese out. It's not something like that you catch a fly from the milk and throw them out. So General Thapar was instructed, he was not chief of the army, to throw the Chinese out. And in the meeting, General Thapar asked for written orders. And the order was signed and given by the Joint Secretary, and he accepted it and pocketed it, and he started the battle against China. All this is there in India's China War by Maxwell, a wonderful book, I think if you get time, you can read it. And I'm just bringing this out only from the sense that if whatever has been sanctioned has not been sanctioned by anybody or by the pressure of anybody, but by the inherent thought of the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi that I should give something to the soldiers. Because Modi has realized that you cannot have a global domination without military power. He has realized it, the army has been beefed up and the importance of the army is increased. This is unlike Pandit Nehru, who probably thought there would be a military coup against him, and he started defanging the army. He didn't want to started promoting all sorts of stupid people here and there, like General Call, And he was made commander of 33 Corps to face the Chinese. All that's part of it. Now, as far as one rank, one pension is concerned, the case was put to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has given a judgment. I have gone through the judgment very carefully. I think there's nothing wrong with the judgment. What the Supreme Court says is that nowhere in history everybody draws the same pension. It's not possible. And government is within its right to say that the revision will be done once every 5 years. What I would say that one could go back to the government and request that there should be a notational revision there could be a notational revision every year. I will close now, gentlemen, and say that the Indian officer cadre in particular, throughout the decades where the British Indian Army was in existence, has been used to always obeying the authorities, and that is so ingrained into them that they never projected anything to the government for anything. And whatever has been given, credit must be given to Mr. Narendra Modi for having sanctioned one rank, one pension. You can call it anything, one rank, one pension, 2 rank, 3 rank, whatever you call it, but there has been a substantial increase in pension, and for this all the Indian Army soldiers must keep in mind It's our right to crib. Everybody can crib. You can criticize. You can do anything. But the facts are, it is only Modi who undid the wrong which was done almost 50 years back in 1973 by the Congress Party. I close now, gentlemen, and once more I will say Jai Hind. I would be happy if you could like this video, in particular my ex-servicemen friends and colleagues, and share it with everybody. Thank you, gentlemen, and goodbye.